Warm welcome, and take it away.
Thanks. Okay, thanks you all for having me. I'm going to read from an essay I recently finished about the 3rd century Roman emperor Elagabalus, one of Rome's notorious bad emperors, like Caligula and Nero. And I'm going to approach her legend. I'll be talking about my use of pronouns in just a minute. I'm going to approach her legend, the many stories told about her, using the occult concept of the egregore, the concept of an astral entity generated by collective patterns of belief. My talk will essentially consist of introductory notes on the belated deification of this maligned emperor, and the creation thereby of a god form that I think is best described as a hybrid of Addis and Babylon. The talk is illustrated with some ancient artifacts, mainly official imperial imagery like this bust here of the emperor, as well as coins, alongside historical paintings of Elagabalus from the Decadent period, when her reputation was being reformed, and finally a couple of artworks of my own. And those are from an ongoing project, something that's a work in progress, and I see this talk as very much an experiment. So we'll begin. I already lost myself a little bit. Here we go. There's Addis and Babylon for you. So the Roman senator Cassius Dio relates the following story about Aurelius Zodicus, an athlete who was presented to the 3rd century Roman emperor Elagabalus by the headhunters charged with supplying the palace with well-hung lovers. The emperor, and this is a quote from Cassius Dio's history, the emperor, on seeing him, sprang up with rhythmic movements, and then, when Aurelius addressed him with the usual salutation, "My lord emperor, hail," he bent his neck so as to assume a ravishing feminine pose, and turning his eyes upon him with a melting gaze, answered without any hesitation, "Call me not lord, for I am a lady." Although the veracity of this and other of the more gossipy bits in Dio's biography of the emperor has been called into question by contemporary historians, will nonetheless obey the wishes of the emperor as reported in Dio's account. It is not my intention here to make claims about the gender or sexual identity of the historical person who came to be known as Elagabalus. Instead, I'm interested in the stories told about her and the seductive monster that those stories, taken all together, conjure across the centuries. I want to bracket the use of the feminine pronoun at the outset as a possibility for multiple points of entry through identity and desire in the following text. I hope you will simultaneously hear in she and her affirmation of the trans feminine and resonance with gay slang. So here we go. To me, she is above all beautiful, a quintessential image of the beloved. Her good looks are mentioned in all of the ancient accounts, as is the ritual dance she performed for her god in the form of a conical black stone, while cymbals crashed and pipes keened. Like the goddess upon whom Lucius calls when he's lost all hope in Apuleius's golden ass, pleading to be transformed from an ass back into a human, the emperor has many names. So, born Sextus Varius Avitus Bassianus and enthroned as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, her posthumous and derogatory nicknames include False Antoninus, to discredit her hereditary claim and fitness to rule. And I'm sorry if some of my pronunciation here is funny. You can correct me later. Gaius, which means womanish man. Sardanapalus, who's a mythical Assyrian king who's famous for his sloth, love of luxury, and effeminacy. Tractitus, the dragged, because of the mistreatment of her corpse after she was assassinated. And Tiberinus, from the Tiber River where her body was thrown. These are just several amongst many derogatory nicknames. The emperor is now mainly known as Elagabalus or Heliogabalus, names that derive from the Syrian solar deity Elagabal, which he served as high priest. Okay, this is one of my drawings. The golden ass would actually be another great nickname for Elagabalus. In his strange, unclassifiable book, Heliogabalus, or the Crowned Anarchist, which is part embroidered biography, part poetic manifesto of religion and cultural revolution, Antonin Artaud describes the emperor's entry into Rome, walking backwards, ass first, as she leads the phallic stone representing her god on a golden chariot drawn by 300 naked women and 300 bulls. So this is Artaud. A rite, above all, that from the religious point of view has its own ambiguous meaning, yet from the viewpoint of Roman custom means that Heliogabalus is entering Rome as ruler, but backwards, and at the outset he's had himself buggered by the whole Roman Empire. This is not the only outrageous story about Elagabalus' ass. She was said to have delighted in quizzing embarrassed senators on whether they too had enjoyed the passive role in anal sex when they were young and beautiful. Another anecdote relates her pleasure in reenacting the Judgment of Paris. This is from the Historia Augusta, which is another ancient account, and also the most unreliable. He himself would take the role of Venus and suddenly drop his clothing to the ground and fall naked on his knees. One hand on his breast, the other before his private parts, his buttocks projecting meanwhile and thrust back in front of his partner in depravity. So those are just several amongst the many outrageous stories that have earned the emperor notoriety, making her an object of both ridicule and fascination. A member of the Severan dynasty from the Syrian city Emesa, where she served from an early age as high priest of the sun god Elagabalus, she gained the throne in 218 at the age of 14 following a military revolt fomented by her grandmother, Julia Mesa, against the emperor, then Emperor Macrinus. Or maybe it's Macrinus. Macrinus had served as Julia Mesa's nephew, the Emperor Caracalla, Praetorian prefect, and plotted his assassination. Caracalla was stabbed to death by a soldier after dismounting his horse to take a piss. To legitimize Elagabalus' dynastic claim and secure the allegiance of the soldiers, Mesa alleged that Caracalla, who was immensely popular amongst the military, was the child's father. So Elagabalus as a child of adultery and incest. And who wouldn't want Caracalla to be your daddy, right? I'm in love with that ancient bust too. Elagabalus ruled 4 short years until her assassination by her own Praetorian Guard in 222. Another plot of her grandmother's, this time to put Elagabalus' cousin, Severus Alexander, on the throne, because the emperor had become too controversial. By one account, Elagabalus hid from her pursuers in the palace latrines, where she was discovered and slain. In the short span of her rule, however, she shocked the Senate, soldiers, and general public. She replaced Jupiter with Elagabal at the summit of the Roman pantheon. She coerced senators to participate in exotic rituals, or rituals that they deemed exotic, from the Near East, dedicated to her god. And she married a Vestal virgin so as to bear godlike children. Vestal virgins, of course, taking very serious vows of chastity. She was also said to have made political appointments based on penis size, prostituted herself in the imperial palace, built a luxurious suicide tower so she could perish in style, and smothered guests to death at a dinner party with an avalanche of rose petals. This is probably one of the most famous stories about her, and it's undoubtedly untrue, but we love it, right? Writing about Elagabalus always entails rehearsing these and other tales of her cruelty, debauchery, religious controversy, and political ineptitude. Okay. So contemporary scholars like Martin Ix and Leonardo de Arizabalaga y Prado cast many of these stories into serious doubt, arguing that they are the slanderous inventions of ancient writers who wanted to discredit Elagabalus, drawing on common literary tropes of bad rulership to do so. The worst of the two killjoys, Erizabalaga y Prado, goes so far as to distinguish between Varius, which is one of the names with which she was born, Varius as the actual but elusive historical person, and therefore the authentic object of historical inquiry, and Elagabalus or Heliogabalus as the emperor's mythical or legendary avatar. He declares his intention as follows. Seeking to define the object of his study, the first question the scholar asks is whether it is a character of fact or a creature of fiction. The other scholar, Martin Ix, focuses the second half of the Crimes of Elagabalus, his work on the emperor, on the creature of fiction, the mythical avatar, by examining the body of scholarly and literary works representing the emperor over the centuries, what German historians refer to as a person's Nachleben, or afterlife. He defines his subject in these chapters as images of the emperor. Much can be learned about the life and legacy of Elagabalus through the images of him that have been constructed throughout history. The term is used in a broad sense here, including not only statues, reliefs, and paintings, which provide us with images in the literal sense of the word, but also literary representations. So reducing Martin Ix's detailed timeline of images to broad strokes, he traces the transformation of Elagabalus from the tyrannical and sexually depraved boy emperor from the eastern provinces, painted by the ancient sources, to the androgynous aesthete of the decadent movement, and finally, a gay and trans icon and anti-hero of today. The term Nachleben is both cogent and suggestive, designating the stories told after a person's death under the sign of their name, but also evoking religious and paranormal notions. One thinks of heaven versus hell, reincarnation, ghosts, and a host of other metaphysical and occult concepts that are foreign to history as an academic discipline. So I'm interested in the creature of fiction and the image. I'm interested in the creature of fiction and the image. From the Nachleben of Elagabalus. I'm interested in the myth, the legend, and the ghost. I'm interested in Elagabalus as an egregore. The general definition of this esoteric concept dovetails with the Erizabalaga y Prado's fictional Elagabalus as opposed to the historical Varius. It describes a non-physical entity generated and sustained by collective patterns of belief. So why use this concept, though, and why not creature of fiction or image, like the historians? Okay, this is our Wiktionary definition here. An autonomous psychic entity that is composed of and influences the thoughts of a group of people. The word derives from the ancient Greek egregoros, meaning wakeful or watcher. It seems to appear first in the apocryphal book of Enoch, where it designates fallen angels who have descended from heaven and fathered a race of giants, the Nephilim, with humans. A story I'm sure many of you know very well. According to Mark Stavish in his book, Egregores, The Occult Entities That Watch Over Human Destiny, the word was introduced into the modern occult lexicon in the mid-19th century by Eliphas Levi, after which it comes to refer to a spiritual entity that watches over a group. These groups include not only occult lodges and spiritual movements, but other units of collectivity, from sports teams and their community of fans to pop cultural constituencies. Stavish names Star Wars fans and steampunk as examples, as well as political parties and nation states. In his study, Stavish cites Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism, which also lists Marxism and National Socialism as emblematic egregores. So the Estonian-Russian Christian mystic Valentin Tomberg anonymously wrote Meditations on the Tarot, in which each chapter takes as its subject one of the 22 trumps of the major arcana as keys to the Christian Hermetic tradition. For instance, the first trump, the juggler, is explored as a lesson in meditation and powers of concentration, skills recognized by most esoteric orders as foundations for further development in occult study. Although Tomberg's identity as the author is now known, we'll respect his wishes and not refer to him again by name. A devout Roman Catholic, he classifies egregores as a species of demon in the chapter on the 15th trump, the devil. So this is our author. The theme of the 15th arcanum of the tarot is one of the generation of demons and of the power that they have over those who generate them. It is the arcanum of the creation of artificial beings and of the slavery into which the creator can fall, becoming a victim of his own creation. The author gives the example of tulpas in Tibetan Buddhism, magical creations fabricated by directed imagination and then destroyed through the withdrawal of belief, a practice that forms part of the mental and spiritual training of a student in that tradition. The card itself shows the devil as an anthropomorphic figure in which typically masculine and feminine physical characteristics are combined with animal attributes, including antlers, wings, and claws. Two smaller figures flank the devil on either side, chained to the pedestal on which the devil stands. We're going to look at a lengthy quote by him now, where he discusses egregores. How are demons engendered? As with all generation, that of demons is the result of the cooperation of the male principle and the female principle, i.e. the will and the imagination, in the case of generation through the psychic life of an individual. A desire that is perverse or contrary to nature, followed by the corresponding imagination, together constitute the act of generation of a demon. The two personages, the one male and the other female, attached to the pedestal of the central personage of the card of the 15th arcanum, the devil, are therefore not the creation or the children of the central personage, as one might be tempted to believe, seeing their small build in comparison with the size of the demon's stature. Rather, on the contrary, it is they who are the parents of the demon and who have become enslaved by their own creation. They represent perverse will and imagination contrary to nature, which have given birth to an androgynous demon, i.e. to a being endowed with desire and imagination which dominates the forces that engendered it. With respect to generation affected collectively, the demon, which in this case is known by the term egregore, is likewise the product of will and imagination, which in this case are collective. I've quoted at length because I think it's such a great description, and it's like a beautifully written book as well. Further on, the anonymous author continues, it is always excess owing to intoxication of the will and imagination which engenders demons, contrasting intoxication with inspiration, which is the lesson of the prior card, temperance. He then criticizes Marx and Engels for not having, quote, simply defended the interests of the industrial workers without letting themselves be carried away by their intoxicated imagination to make statements of universal historical significance. Essentially going on to argue that they made the mistake of substituting ideological superstructure for divine authority, and thereby created the egregore of Marxism. The concept of the egregore may not be commonly used by academic historians, but history has been a major concern for those wishing to define egregores, providing a catch-all explanatory device for occultists regarding the ideological dimensions of social formations and a host of other phenomena that are conventionally in the purview of the social sciences. So, returning to that initial question, why egregore rather than creature of fiction or image, we can now answer that the concept has the advantage of emphasizing a collective relationship to images, and it posits both the demonic power of those images and the agency of individuals and communities in sustaining and even drawing power from those images through imagination and ritual. Due to the anonymous author's Christian perspective, egregores are regarded as always already evil, rather than neutral or ambivalent, like in Mark Stavish's book. The value judgment in Meditations seems especially apt, though, considering how Elagabalus has been thoroughly demonized. Arrizabalaga Prado writes that she is, quote, considered by most ancient and modern historiographers one of the worst of his kind, unquote. A characterization that we recognize now as laced with xenophobic, orientalist, homophobic, and transphobic invective and invention. It is exactly this worst emperor ever, however, with whom others fall madly in love. This is another quote from the historian. Modern writers of avowedly creative literature, including drama and artificers of dance, music, opera, painting, and sculpture, find him fascinating. They see in him a crowned anarchist, hero of hedonism, saint and martyr of the sexual revolution, unquote. So Elagabalus, considered as an egregore, is composed not only of the stories told about her, but the emotional, moral, and political charge of those stories. As an egregore, she is composed of stories that demonize the homosexual, the effeminate male, and the transfeminine, and she is also composed of those stories retold by the homosexual, the effeminate male, and the transfeminine. So what I'm suggesting is that something like deification has followed demonization, and a new God form, one that we might qualify as queer, or attracting queer identification and desire, has come into being or is in the process of coming into being. The adventures of Elagabalus as an egregore begin with her erasure, with the state-sanctioned condemnation of her memory. Her statues were defaced and smeared with shit, and the inscriptions bearing her name were crossed out with chisels. She leaps from that gap or hole, the place she once stood, that is now absent of her presence, and she dances, striking one pose after the next, each corresponding to an image in the minds of those who loathe and love her. From a teenage emperor assassinated at 17 by the Praetorian Guard, she transforms successively into a cruel monster, a creature of unusual and excessive appetites, an effeminate impostor from the East, an anarchist intent on hastening the decline of empire, an Epicurean of metaphysical blasphemies, a sacred fool whose blunders cause the skirts of reality to lift, and an androgynous angel straddling the ruins of the ancient past and our precarious present. Each pose expands, embellishes, or inverts the prior gesture. Each pose spins the wheel of Elagabalus's fortune, turning shit into gold and back again. This is Antonin Artaud again, this quote. If there was around the corpse of Heliogabalus, tombless, its throat cut by his police force in his palace latrines, a heavy flow of blood and excrement, there was around his cradle a heavy flow of sperm. Heliogabalus was born in an era when everybody slept with everybody, and it will never be known when or by whom his mother was actually impregnated, unquote. So to the shit, blood, and cum that frame her fate, we can also add gold, the gold of solar fire, as well as the earthly gold embroidered on her purple robes, the gold of her imperial wealth. These golds and others figure prominently in Artaud's book. I think it's doubtless that he perceived in these substances that stain Elagabalus's legend the four phases of the great work. So blackening shit, whitening cum, yellowing gold, and reddening blood. So four cardinal substances and a color wheel that is also a wheel of fortune and a diagram of transformation. It's unsurprising that the French author Jean Genet wrote a play about Elagabalus. In his writing, Genet relished overturning hierarchies and marrying opposites. He conferred sainthood on homosexuals and prostitutes, and he crowned thieves and other criminals as royalty. And he discerned also in murderous rivalry the desire to fuck and vice versa. So some Eros and Thanatos too, right? Genet offers another example of what we might call reversible alchemy, where the goal is not for the gold. Wrapping up. Reversible alchemy, where the goal is not for the gold, but to demonstrate the volatility of value itself. So I see this idea of reversible alchemy as itself like a kind of a queer concept. Elagabalus' fate, the fate of her body and life, as well as her image afterwards, has resembled a turbulent game of snakes and ladders. She goes up and down, turns backwards and flips. She causes opposites to merge and trade places. But we can also ask, is it us, her lovers, who rise and fall and spin head over heels around her, transfixed by her, playing the wheel to her hub, satellites to her sun? Is that why we love her? To tear ourselves apart and be put back together again, but differently? I have more questions than answers at this point. What is her desire? How do those of us who count ourselves amongst her lovers best serve her? What do we gain or lose in devoting ourselves to her? And now as a kind of postscript, I'm going to add my own personal nicknames for Elagabalus to the list that we started with of her names. Solar Phallic Princess, obviously. EH, the Poor Little Ghost Boy, and Our Lady of the Latrines. To each their own private Elagabalus. Okay, thanks. Yeah, sweet. Oh, yeah.